Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Cross's Corner. I'm Martin Cross, and with me today is British Women's Chief Coach, Super Coach Andrew Randell.
Oh, gee, that's a bit far-fetched. I don't know whether I'm super coach yet, but I am working on it. I'm giving it a good go. Thanks, Martin.
Yeah.
It's lovely to be here, and I've often enjoyed your show, listening to people on it. So hopefully I can provide a little bit of insight to someone out there that's useful in their career.
Thank you. How much is the warm glow of Paris still lingering for you, or has it disappeared and your head's into what's next already?
Well, look, I think the week I got back from Paris, my wife was on camp with the under-19 team here, and then a week after that, she flew to Canada for 2 weeks. So I had the honour of looking after my kids for those 3 weeks, which certainly brought me back to reality very quickly with all their various activities like gymnastics and swimming and piano and guitar and all numerous other things. I drop off, pick up. I was frantic, so I didn't have much time to dwell on things. So, but of course, I've been in my career to plenty of world championships where I haven't got a result, and I think you've got to enjoy the ones where you do get a result. So I've thoroughly enjoyed this one. There's no doubt about that.
Where did you watch the races from? Like, I'm interested, where were you when you were watching the women's quad race?
I was in the car, the coach's car that follows the media truck up the side of the course. I generally like to watch the race. Otherwise, I'm watching the live feed, which is dictated, or what you see is dictated by the cameraman and what they want to show you. So I prefer to see the field and where we're travelling and whether our pre-race tactics talks are coming to fruition and where people are with it. I just like to see all six crews. It's the way I do it.
Describe the atmosphere in that coach's truck, Andy.
It was pretty quiet. I'm usually the most talkative. There's no doubt about that. The German coach didn't say a word until the very end. So, but yeah, look, it's always pretty interesting in the truck. Sometimes it's very much personality dependent. If they're a bit talkative like I tend to be, then there's often good chat. Otherwise, I've certainly sat in there with some really nervous coaches like that German fellow. He's a lovely bloke, but he's certainly very quiet.
Yeah, is that matching with Witkowski, the German guy? I think
probably
be,
yes.
actually.
Yes, I think it was him. I'd only met him in the truck twice, so eating the final.
I think the Germans paid a lot of money for him to come over from Poland to Germany. Just thinking about that race, how much was it in the plan, the way that the British women took it off? Because they were like down on the Dutch and down on the Ukrainians in like the first 250, 300s, even going through the 500. And, how bothered were you about that?
I can't say I was that bothered. We're a little bit further back than I'd wanted to be, or wanted them to be. We have never been a traditionally fast-starting crew, which is a theme, in our review. We're currently undertaking a review of the program, but across the board our crews tend not to be that quick out of the blocks. So it's something obviously with LA in mind we're going to have to address, because it's going to become more and more important to be out quick. But yeah, look, I wasn't that worried early, because that's where we've been all year, and the previous year we'd never been quick starters. We'd always been out with the field, but I never liked to be much more than the length behind the winning crew, and I think we might have dropped back a little further than that at some stage there, maybe not. But yeah, to answer your question directly, I wasn't that worried early on. I would have preferred them to move up a little earlier than they did.
Yeah, looking at that race and watching the Dutch through the middle 1,000, I mean, they were sculling beautifully, as were your crew too. But I'm thinking you can't plan in a race to win it, in the last few strokes, or can you?
No. I mean, as you know, the coach's truck, van, watching vehicle, whatever you want to call it, that is turned off at around the 150 metre mark. We can't get past the last grandstand. So I had no idea. I was
Oh, you're joking.
fully resigned to second place. So I thought, oh well, that's second for sure. But you know, the German coach who had his, you know, must have had his phone on, because he said to me, "Oh, your girls just won," and I said, "Did they? Oh, it's quite right." Don't let them know that. I had every faith they were going to pull it off all the way.
Yeah.
No, I don't think you can plan for that at all. But I mean, we certainly had very strong belief that, you know, if we were, as we had the year before, that if we were anywhere near them, you know, within a canvas or a link, we had a really good shot
Yeah.
at the Dutch crew. That's kind of what we were very confident as a group that if we were anywhere near them, we always had a shot in that last part. And so I think the girls would have been very confident. And you know, drawing back on my experience 20 years ago in the heat when I was rowing, in the heat of the battle, when it's a close one like that, you don't really know. You just put your head down and go. And so I'm sure they wouldn't have been as worried as the spectators sitting in the stands, meters, who are thinking, "Oh no, what's happening?" They would have just been going for it hard, and you know, it's real belief in there. There's no question about that.
I think Imogen Grant's partner puts out these graphs. You might have seen them actually of the speed using the World Rowing sort of GPS thing,
Yeah.
and my understanding is that the Dutch couldn't hold their speed, and the British women did hold their speed, but it wasn't so much a British sprint as a Dutch slowing down, you know, just because of the pressure. Is that how you see it, or is there a difference?
I think that's how it shows on the graphs. Yeah, the Dutch just struggle a bit in the last 100 metres, you know, with maintaining boat speed. But you've got to put them in that position. You know, you've got to make them work hard earlier, and that's, you know, obviously the girls did that. They pushed very hard through the middle, and the Dutch did a great job trying to stay ahead and hold them off, and it weren't quite good enough. But, yeah.
I want to come back to the British and Dutch thing later, but kind of now I'd just like, you know, to you to give a flavour of yourself, because rowing's quite a family affair for you, isn't it?
It is. It's always been a family affair. You know, my brother started when we were, I don't, my mum and dad were laymen, so we grew up in Papua New Guinea. We spent 10 years in Papua New Guinea.
Wow.
In the mission fields there, out in the back of nowhere. So that's where we grew up, and we were sent to boarding school. I was in year 6 and my brother was in year 7. And that's where we started rowing at Wesley College, one of the big private schools in Perth. We were sent back there because that's where we were from and that's where the family were. So we went back there, and that was our introduction to rowing. If you're a boarder at one of those big schools, you tended to row in the summertime. That was the summer sport of choice. And then, of course, in WA, it was either football or hockey in winter. So played hockey in winter and rowed in summer, and that's where we started. And then we were moved. My parents came back from the tropics, I think, when I was in year 8 or 9, and they moved to Canberra, took up jobs in Canberra.
Yeah.
So I rowed for Canberra Rowing Club there for 3 or 4 years, and that's kind of when my rowing career started. So.
And your sister, she rows as well, or did she
She
row?
did. She was. We all went to school together. Paul Thompson, myself, Ellen. We all went to the same school.
That's crazy.
Lopia and Narrabundah College, and you know, Ellen and Tom and myself were all in Peter Shakespeare's initial school squad back in the day. So that was in the late 78, 79, 1980. So that's how old I am now.
Yeah.
Real veteran. But yeah, so Pete coached us in those early years. We're part of what we call the SRA, Shakespeare Rowing Academy. So we used to go on camps, and you know, they were great years. You know, a couple of the camps we wanted were in the Riverina, which are the winery districts of Victoria. You know, there was a Christmas treble they used to conduct there in the Gambia and Rutherglen and Yarrawonga, and we had some great times there. Rowing was quite simple in those days.
Yeah.
Travelled, and it was very, very easy. Just put the boats on the roofs and off you go. So,
what about your international experience as a rower? I guess you were lightweight, were you?
I was a lightweight, and you know, basically, it's probably why I'm coaching now. I think, you know, guys, if you're, you know, the awesome foursome like Jimmy or Drew or, you know, Redgrave or a lot of or Pinson, you probably don't go into coaching because you've been so successful in your own career, you don't have to. But I only ever made teams when there was an 8 and a 4 selected. I was never in the top 4 guys. So you probably end your rowing career, and feeling a little bit less fulfilled, and quite often you move back into coaching, which is kind of what I did. I did a couple of degrees in sports science and a master's in physiology, and I went to work for a health insurance company, HBA, running corporate health checks on people and counselling for the first 2 or 3 years after I retired from rowing. But then I got headhunted by Sydney Grammar School to run their rowing program. They were really struggling, and they were thinking about disbanding it. So I agreed to come in and run their program if they let me do a PhD. So I ended up, they paid me a teacher's salary, which I think at the time was about twice what you got for doing a PhD with the NHMRC, the National Health and Medical Research Council, gave out PhD scholars a basic tax-free wage of 20 odd grand. The school paid me 46, so I was on twice what my mates were on. But I did a PhD at the hospital up the road from Grammar, which was at the Garvan Institute of Medical Research. So it wasn't a medical doctorate degree, it was a research science degree. So I was looking down test tubes and doing all that kind of thing. But that's where my coaching probably started, when I took over that Grammar program.
That's really interesting. And I'm guessing you could use a doctor in front of your name, and you don't.
No, I certainly can. I've got a PhD. Got some. Well, that was 6 odd years of pretty hard grind. Anyone who's done a PhD would know what I'm talking about. I think only half of them get through. So it is a tough grind when you do one of those things, and you have to write your dissertations. But I was lucky. I did it with a fairly big medical group, and we had, they call it sausage sizzle productions. We had nurses out in the country in a place called Dubbo, and I did mine in bone density, and so we had nurses collecting a lot of our data, basically, and then I would massage the data, write the topic up depending, on what it was. In that day, vitamin D receptor genes, osteoporosis was very topical. We had a lot of osteoporosis in the community. I think it was the third highest killer in Australia, or cost, morbidity costs. So it was very topical, and that's kind of where I found myself doing. I wasn't really fascinated by the area, but it was local and was up the road, and I kind of fell into that area. So that's what we're researching.
What's the thing about your love for the sport? Because I think I heard somewhere that you kind of, what you did in terms of your PhD was like work, and yet when you got into coaching rowing, it was like, a hobby, or it was a love that you had. What is it about the sport that you love so much, or drew you into it in that way?
No, I think that's very true. I think a lot of people, I hear quite a few people say that, being a rower, or, we're used to hard grind. We work, 3 times a day, 3 sessions a day, hard work. So, I found the PhD just hard work. I had a family, but I was used to doing the hours. So but it was a grind. There's no doubt about that. And whereas I contrasted that with my rowing at the time, when the rowing season was on, and I could do a 90-hour week on a rowing camp and not even feel stressed or tired, anything. If I did a 90-hour week at the hospital, mate, I'd know about it. It was pretty hard, boring work. So I think it's that love of what you do makes it effortless. It takes away the effort. And I think that's true for most things. If you find something you love, probably, what made me reflect on that was my wife, who was a musician at the time. And, she used to go off to work and play in bands and do shows, and just, it seemed to be like fun. And there I was, 8, 9, 10 hours a day at a hospital in a grind, talking to old people and taking bloods, and it wasn't particularly fun. So that's what I gravitated back to rowing. I could have probably earned a lot more if I'd stayed in the medical research side, but it wasn't just not enjoyable enough for me.
Yeah, and you kind of went through a progression, which I guess must be pretty common in Australia, or indeed in GB, of coaching school crews, then international youth crews, and you're at the Junior World Championships. I'm guessing under 23s, and then when did you make your transition to the senior team?
To the senior team, I think it was Beijing. 2008, I coached the lightweights with Antonio Morigiovanni. So we had a great couple of years there looking after the lightweight 4 and the lightweight double. So we had, unfortunately, the boat crews got fairly sick in Beijing, so the results weren't reflective of their ability. But
that was a thing in Beijing, wasn't it? People got sick in the village. Were they in the village, the crews?
They were in the village. They were in the village,
God,
and
yeah.
in the same little apartment. And one of them got sick, and you're sharing the same lounge and kitchen. And you know, as you say, they certainly weren't Robinson Crusoe. There's a lot of hard luck stories there. You know, and that's what I mean by just enjoying the time here. You know, because that certainly wasn't a great post-Olympic feeling when I got back home.
Yeah.
Very disappointing. So, you know, when you do get the good ones, you want to enjoy them, you know.
Yeah. I just think, you know, let's take it up to is it your first Olympic medal as a coach? Was that the bronze in Tokyo?
Yeah, that certainly was.
So by that time, you've obviously worked in the Australian environment. You work with people like Ian Wright and so on. I'm just wondering, and you mentioned Antonio already. In terms of role models or influences on you, you know, because that must have been a pretty formative period, obviously.
Yeah.
Who were your role models? What were your influences, and where were you getting your ideas from?
Well, early on, you know, I was coached by Rusty Robinson for many years, and so Rusty, I actually lived with Rusty for quite a few, you know, years there in Sydney. So he was the first probably big influence on my rowing career. A very technical orientated coach, very much along the lines of Harry Mahon, Kiwi, you know. So
yeah.
And then probably Tim McLaren also, Harold Yarling was the head coach in New South Wales in my early years. So Tim and Harold and I did a lot of work together in those early years. So they've all been very instrumental in moulding me as a coach and giving me ideas. And then, you know, you've got the other Australian coaches like Don O, Noel Donaldson, and who I've worked with, you know, quite a bit. So I would say, you know, probably the most influential, if I had to name a couple, would be Harold and Tim McLaren.
Yeah. And well, what about ideas? Because obviously, as a PhD, you know, I know it's in terms of bow density, but I'm thinking in understanding the body and putting together a training program. You would be pretty well qualified to do that. Where were your influences from? You know, from putting together that program? Because
I was very much East German approach from Harold's stuff, because all through the 90s, you know, I worked with Harold, so it was very, you know, Eastern European type style. A lot of UT, I think you call it UT2 stuff here. I get confused because in Australia it's UT1 is UT2 and UT2 is UT1 here. So, but you know, the low intensity aerobic stuff is, you know, that the Eastern Bloc guys did a lot of. So I was very much along those lines, you know, with step rates on the weekend, that type of thing. You know, it would be very similar to Jürgen, I'm sure, what Harold did. And then I changed quite a bit when I worked under Ian Wright for 4 years. I adopted a much more pyramidal approach to rowing, because working with Ian, that brought immediate success to what we were doing in Australia. And we do a lot more of that, we call it UT1 here stuff, which is, I think, UT2 in Australia. It's the utilisation. So that higher intensity, and we're paddling around at 80% speed. So we did a lot more about that. So you know, certainly those 4 years with Ian have certainly changed the way that I write programs now. There's no question about it. It's much more pyramidal. You know, I do a bit in the middle, a lot at the bottom still, and then a little bit at the top, you know, probably.
Yeah. And can you describe or tell me what the physiological justification for that change was or is? You know, in other words, why did it make so much sense to you? It wasn't just empirical that we're getting better results, was it? Was there?
Definitely. No, there's a physiologist that Ian worked with, you know, Brett Smith. He's written a lot of papers on this area. But he, you know, I could talk the science lingo with him, and he very much persuaded me that this was the way to go. But basically, with that, we call it moderate intensity continuous training, UT1 stuff, 80% speed, rate 20. And the advantages of that for us is, firstly, it's the drive time is extremely specific to racing. So you can, if you measure the drive time in a race, it's about 0.7 of a second. When you are going at 80% boat speed and you hold the rate at rate 20, to get 80%, you have to wind the handle very hard. So, and the idea of keeping the rate down at 20 is that your lactate doesn't climb. So you get no lactate drift. So you can do a phase at that speed. But because it's so specific, the handle pressure is so specific to race base, the rowers never forget how to race. So that's the big advantage of it. They get that sensation, even though they're doing a lot of miles at rate 20, that they know what the handle pressure should feel like at race rate. So they just slot into it quite quickly. And you'll often see our crews, they're very strong in the middle 1,000. They know the pressure or the handle speed that they're just so used to it. So that's the first reason. Secondly, if you want to row 80% at rate 20, it encourages length. You have to row long. You can't row short. So it encourages length. It's technically efficient, because if you're doing 20 Ks at 80% boat speed, sooner or later, you've got to find, in a crew boat, you've got to find some efficiency, or you blow yourself out, so the rough edges smooth out. So I think it is, certainly, it improves your technique in that sense. It optimizes your training time. If you want to go out there and have a break every 4K or 3K, then your session time goes up. If you just go out to do 20K at 80% speed, it's quick. So it's good bang for your buck. You're out there for a short time. And of course, it develops the energy system that produces 80% of our energy in a rowing race. 80% is aerobic. So it really focuses hard on that. So you're targeting the system that you want to. So I think, there's probably other reasons as well, but they're the main ones.
That's really brilliant. I got all that, and I'm kind of a non-scientist, but that was really interesting to listen to. What I'm wondering is, my understanding is that you, as a coach, you might favour crews working together and doing that sort of work with each other. How much does competitiveness change the intensity of that type of work?
I think quite a bit. If I look at historically around the world, the countries that have done very well are the ones with centralized training programs. So I think, that increased competition that you get from centralization, the targeted support that you can put around your athletes in a centralized program, the unity of purpose, all of those things, I think, are what make a centralized program successful. And they're the big programs around the world that are doing well. So that would be the first thing, about the centralized approach. So it makes sense to me that if you have a centralized approach, you train together, because if you don't, why have a centralized approach? So I do a lot of it. We try and row the boats together as much as possible. Not all the time, but you can overdo it. There's no question about that. You can drive people, into a hole very quickly if they're always on the handle 7 days, 6 days a week. It's very tough. I wouldn't do that.
Yeah. While we're on that, I reference this in commentary in the women's quad final, but it's generally well known, and you'll know all about it. Ilko Meerhorst, the Dutch chief coach, runs. I hope I get this right. A significantly different training approach to you. In that, my understanding is they train at a lower intensity for a lot more time than you might. Now, maybe I've got that wrong. The word polarized has been used, although I'm not sure Ilko used that word. What's your take on that?
Look,
and how influenced would you be by, say, for example, the Dutch success in the Olympics using that type of program?
Look, it interests me a lot. whenever anyone's doing well, I always look and see, ask the questions. I'm very inquisitive about why they're doing well, how they're doing well. And certainly the Dutch top the medal table. And so you need to have a look at what they're doing. There's no question that they do have that. You call it, by polarized training. I think, what I hear from some of the people that I know that are fairly close to Dutch is that they do long Ks at the lower intensity. They also do altitude training, which is different to what we do here. And both those areas interest me a lot, but it's not where I've had my success. It's not where I've won gold medals. And so that's kind of why I haven't, I'm inquisitive. There's no doubt that it's certainly a very successful way to do it. But, I don't know enough about it to really comment too much, Martin. So I'm sorry about that. But,
yeah, no. That's a great shout. So in terms of you in Tokyo, we mentioned you coaching the Australian women to a bronze medal, which must have felt great. I was asked by somebody over social media, ask Andrew why he left Australia.
Look, I tried to get a head coach job in Australia several times, and I just couldn't pick one up. I'd applied, I think, 2 or 3 times. So it was the desire to lead my own program that really led to me coming abroad. I would have stayed if I could have picked up a head coach job there, but it was the one area that I hadn't really challenged myself with. I'd run successful school programs, I'd run successful club programs, I'd run successful institute programs. But whenever I got to the top level in Australia, I was always, under a head coach, which was never a problem for me. Someone's got to be under the head coach. I've got, a few, who are very, very competent coaches with James and Darren Whiter, who've been, working with me. But I wanted to run the top program because you can't add your flavour to it if you're not in charge. And I always wanted to test out whether the successes that I'd had in clubs and schools and institutes would come to fruition if I was running an elite program. And I'd never had that chance. So that was the main reason why I moved. To try and get the opportunity.
Yeah, that sounds really sensible. You don't have to answer this, but obviously Australia were looking for a new head coach, and I'm guessing that your name might have been on the list as a potential.
I think I was approached. There's no doubt about that. But I think it's very early for me to leave the job at the moment. I feel like we've done a great job building the program to where it is, and I'm very excited about the next 4 years. So that's where I'll be.
So when you came to Britain, I mean, clearly the whole thing of Tokyo and the results, or perhaps a lack of them there, was a thing. I mean, how much of an idea did you have of what perhaps the British system needed, and what was it you found out when you got there? I've kind of seen or read somewhere, that stopping things like people criticizing each other or stuff like that, simple basic stuff. What were your ideas, and how did the reality of what you found when you got on the ground turn out?
Well, I came in at a good time because, the British women hadn't won many medals at all. I think they'd won, a silver medal, a bronze medal, or a silver one in 2017, and they'd pretty well struggled from then to win any medals at a world championship level. So that's always reasonably nice, whether you come into a school that hasn't been doing well or an institute that hasn't been well, because you get a chance to put your stamp on it and change it fairly quickly. So I'm big on the cultural side. I think that's really important. We all tend to do the same miles now in international rowing. We all have a 6-day-a-week program, 3 sessions a day. So where's your point of difference going to be? And for us, or for me, it's always been cultural. It's always been, well, let's decide what our trademark behaviours are going to be, and let's make sure that they're live and lived by the athletes. So when I came in, I started that process, at one of the training camps. I asked them, you usually, if you're doing a trademark behaviours type session, you'll ask the athletes 3 questions. You'll say, how do you think you're perceived by your opposition? What do you think the opposition think when they come up against you in a race? And then, and then they'll say, look, well, they're probably. It was interesting at the time actually, because the girls thought, a lot of them, it took a while to get down to the nitty gritty. They often thought, we're British. They think it's going to be a tough race, and so I said, well, I've been racing the Brits women for a while now. I don't think any of the girls that I've coached have really thought it's going to be a tough race. You haven't been in the medals or on the dice. So, sometimes it takes them a while to get the right idea. But, you ask them those questions. How do you think you're perceived by your opposition? How would you like to be perceived by your opposition? So, and, then you say, well, what behaviours do you need to exhibit to get from A to B, from how you're currently perceived to where you want to, how you want to be perceived. And those things, they'll say that the traditional things like, we need to be tough, resilient, robust,
Yes.
competitive, technically efficient. They'll use all those words, and you've got to come up, you group all of them into different categories, and then you come up with 3 trademark behaviours. And ours were, committed, teamwork, and united, some more professional I can't even remember now. But we came up with 3 words that we lived by and, worked on for the next 3 years. And that's where you start. And then I have little cues and exercises on the way through that help that feeling of belonging. So the trademark behaviours tie you together, and you try and work on different things each year that help renew them or bring them to life. So, for example, a couple of the things that we've done over the years are gratitude. We work, there's 30 odd athletes in the group, so every morning our briefing, start the briefing by saying, I want each of you in turn, over the next 4 weeks, just to say one thing you're grateful about, on that particular day. So we go around the group doing that, and then I might have a break, and the next month I might say, well, girls, this month's task is one of you each morning is going to tell me what your favourite quote is and why, and then have a bit of a break. And then next one, it might be, I want each of you to tell me who your 3 things about a team member here that you like. And so they have to go around and think about a team member that in the group, in the team, and they have to, say 3 things they like about that person. And then I think we did favourite memory towards the end here. We said, what's your favourite memory of the last 2 years? So they had to give the favourite memory. And I think also, we kind of ended with, who would you have in your boat? So, their first coach, some would say someone in the room, but they all come, and that small 1-minute exercise at the beginning of every.
So I think the reason that Andrew's phone has gone slightly off is because someone's tried to ring him on it, and it's going to come back in a minute. So you can be sure of that. But it's absolutely fascinating what Andrew was talking about there in terms of,
that was the Olympic gold medal is our Everest in rowing. So we built the year around that. The first 3 months from October to December was about getting to base camp, doing the hard graft, getting yourself there, climatizing at base camp.
So I'm sorry, Andrew's gone off again, and it's like he's saying something really interesting that I'd really love to get. I'm sure that Andrew will get back on again. It's just a question of him coming out on his phone and coming in. It's so frustrating, isn't it, when there's that really fascinating thing. He was talking about the stages through the season, and that's going to be really interesting. Yeah, Jerry Michaels, thanks, Jerry, for your comment. He mentioned the Brits don't go to altitude, but the Dutch do. Is that correct? Hello.
I'm back. Yeah.
You're back. You dropped out there, and I was just waffling on. You were talking about culture, and then you talked a bit about Everest and climbing a mountain, which I'd love to you to just go over, because I heard a bit.
Okay.
What I wonder whether any of your athletes or you as coaches, you had the conversation about things like favorite quote or stuff you felt gratitude for, whether that was something in the coaching team or it was just the relationship between you and the athletes.
I think that, look, the coaches took part in that as well. They were all part of it. So it's all part of the one team, one dream philosophy that we want to build ourselves on. So the coaches are always in that whole conversation, and the support staff, as well. So we're all in there, and I would ask the coaches, what they were grateful for on a particular day as well. They were all part of it. So, we tried to have that one team, one dream type philosophy to the degree that, even loading boat trailers, we're looking at, let's load the top rack first, and then come right down to the bottom rack. So you don't just undo the riggers on your boat. We look at what boats are going on the top, and everyone goes and de-rigs them and puts them on, and then etc. down the bottom. And when we unload, we do it the same way. We unload the bottom rack and we work up to the top. And when all the boats have got riggers on them, then we go to our individual crews. But they're the kind of tricks of the trade, if you like, to build a one team approach. From top down. That emphasis on reserves, as well. The reserves provide the upward pressure. So let's look after our reserves. Let's not ignore the reserves. That's all part of that culture that you want to try and build in a squad.
Yeah. You were talking about the Olympic year, like the analogy of climbing a peak. Could you just run through that?
Yeah, we had that period of October to December. That was our base camp type period, working up to base camp, getting yourself acclimatized to the altitude, that type of thing. And then January, February, we have our camps in Aviz and Azul, and that was the climb from base camp to Camp 2, which is the top of the glacier. So that's up the coal face, a little bit of work. And then we have our racing block, and that was the analogy of climbing from 2 to Camp 3, which is up to 7,000 meters. That's with racing work. We pick up our, race tools and practice our race routines, all those kind of things. And then, from Camp 3, we went into the death zone, 8,000 meter part, which is, our camp in Varazzi, the hard work camp, if you like, the last work camp. And then we have our summit push, which is, and I was using an analogy. If you look at the 52 expedition, where Hillary and Tenzing got to the top, when they started, there were 360 porters or something that went to base camp with all the supplies. And then as you go up the mountain, it drops off until the final stage, that last little push. There's only the two of them. There might be a pair. There's only two of you in the boat that go for the summit, or them, or four. But you're dependent on all those people underneath you to get you to that point. So it's those kind of analogies that, I think keep people on track and fresh and sharp,
Yeah, one of the things that I've heard is that the girls, the women enjoy. There's more enjoyment, and I guess partly maybe that's because of success, but I guess that's also to do with the culture. I mean, how do you measure that? And is that true?
I definitely think it is true. It was interesting, some of the things that you learn in the Australian system. When we come to Europe, we come for 3 months or 10 weeks, 12 weeks. We do all the World Cups, and it was too expensive to fly back and forward. So when we came to camp in Varese, we were very used to having cars available to go away for days off, drive. And the British culture was very different when I came. Their Varese camps were very much work camps. There was no days off. They didn't have access to cars. They had to catch buses. So, and that is primarily because it's a much shorter period of time that they're there. They're only there 4 weeks or so. So you probably don't need to build those things in. But it was interesting for me to observe from the outside the enjoyment the girls got when I said, "Oh, we've got the weekend off and I don't want you going home. I want you to pick a B&B somewhere out Como or Maggiore or whatever and go for a weekend off and stay here. We'll see you back on, Sunday night, and we'll get back into it on Monday." But just, and now they've got some cars so we can go easily off to ice creams or go down for a swim in Maggiore or across Como. And just those small things make those long training camps, quite enjoyable. And I think it is the modern world, if you like. If you can't bring the athletes with you, if you can't make it an enjoyable process, you're going to lose the athletes and you'll very soon lose your own job. So I think that's pretty important. I think it's part of the modern philosophy of not just winning, but winning well and having a happy athlete group. That's, again, a point of difference. If people are going to work for you,
that's so frustrating. We were just talking there about the philosophy of enjoyment that the British women have, and I think it was fascinating how.
Sorry, Martin.
Back again? Yeah. No, gone. There you go.
I'm not quite sure, Marty, how to stop people. Whenever anyone rings me, it cuts me off.
It cuts you off, yeah.
That is the problem.
Yeah. So I think one.
Oh, back. Sorry.
Yeah.
What happens is whenever anyone rings me, it cuts me off from you. So I don't know why that.
I think the phone prioritizes the phone, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
Jerry Michaels, he coaches over in the States, and one of the top sort of public schools in the States, and he's asked this question about altitude, and I kind of thought I'd just say, obviously, Jurgen had this thing with altitude and going to Silveretta, and there was the Sierra Nevada camp as well. And that's not a route you've chosen to go down. Maybe you could explain why?
I think when I read the literature on altitude, it's very mixed. There are plenty of examples of people like the British women who can do very well without altitude training. But equally, there are, all of Jurgen's crews would have done altitude. Harold Yarling always went to altitude with any of the Australian crews that he coached. So, but it is just not something that I've done enough of that gives me the confidence that I can do it well. I would need just to understand a little bit more, have that background, work with someone who's done it, like a Paul Stannard or one of the Steve Trapmore, Christian. I know they've done it for years, so there's certainly the access to do it. The only reason I don't is because I just don't have the background or the experience in it, and I've had plenty of success without it. So,
yeah, thank you. I'm wondering when you came, in terms of what you thought might be success, and I guessing you'd be looking at the Olympiad, and I know it's not a fixed thing, so your goals might change, but given what happened in Paris, with gold medals in 2 gold medals and silver medals from the 4 and the bronze medals from the double and the 8. How close, or how, where did that sit in terms of what would represent success, and how far maybe did you achieve, what overachieve?
I think 0.1 of a second in the 4, and we would have really hit all our success buttons. But as was with the quad, you're going to be either side of that here and there, and we could have easily got 3 gold medals, and then we would have topped the medal table, not the Dutch. There was only 0.1 of a second in it. So, look, there's no question that 5 medals at an Olympic Games is exceptional, and we should be very proud of that. And that I think is successful. But I would have loved to have won that gold medal that we missed out on. We call it the treble. We've been going after the treble, for 2 years, and we did it once, and that was the World Cup 2 this year.
Yeah,
that was the only time we did it in those 2 years that we've been shooting for it. So, look, it's hard, no question. But I could not say that it wasn't successful. Put it that we had a great year. There's no doubt about it.
How good a row did the women's 4 have? How close to their best were they in that race against the Dutch? It was interesting because I know you beat the Dutch by over 5 seconds in Varese, and then it was 2 in Lucerne, and then clearly the Paris result was different. How did you see that performance?
Look, I thought it was a very, very good performance from our women's 4. I think they were 0.1 of a second off winning it, and that's an Olympic gold medal. So it reminded me of your swimmer. He's the breaststroke guy who got the silver by 0.00.
Adam Peaty, was it?
Adam Peaty. It reminded me of Adam. Another 0.15, and he would have been a gold medalist again.
Yeah.
So and it was very similar with our 4, So I thought they had a very good row. I thought the Dutch, were excellent. Probably figured them out a little bit. Knew that they tended to row from in front, our boat, and if they could somewhere near them, it would worry them a little bit. So probably just outgunned a little bit there or outthought. But I thought the girls, I was very, very proud of them and very happy with their row. I thought it was very solid.
It's fascinating talking to you, Andy, and you're clearly a person who loves to develop themselves and has done throughout their life and career. I mean, I'm wondering where development is for you now, because in one sense, you're the chief coach, you are the head guy. How do you seek to develop yourself and perhaps look for different things in the next Olympiad or to change your approach?
Well, it does fascinate me that whole topic is how do you get a Jurgen type success where you can go cycle after cycle after cycle after cycle winning gold medals, and that to me is a good challenge. Antonio said an interesting thing to me a couple of days ago when I was having a chat with him. He said to me, usually it's the 3rd cycle that you've got to be careful. You've got to change things up a little bit about that, But, I was having a coffee with Christian the other day, and I said to Christian, did Jurgen change anything up? And he said, no, he kept it much the same over and over again. So, you say, you've got to keep it fresh. No question about that. You've got to keep them motivated. So the culture has to be there. So, I'm not sure that, we've all got human bodies and they all respond the same to stimuli. So I'm not sure that you have to change too much about that side. I think it's more keeping the mind fresh and the focus real, having your different Everests, if you like, to keep them on task. That kind of thing, I think, is probably more important in keeping the freshness to the program.
Yeah, I guess one thing I was just aware of, that the former England football manager Gareth Southgate, I know that he went and visited, I think he might have even come to Caversham. I'm not sure about that, but would visit top sports or even in business or industry, just to get ideas like that. And I wondered how much that was part of things that you like to do.
Look, I would take any opportunity to do that, to go to a high performance environment and look at what they do. I soak it all up. So I think it's very important, and I'll definitely be looking for opportunities to do that. I'd love to go and see the Romanian setup over there, because they've gone down the route of high rate, and just see. I kind of know what they do, but it'd be nice to just try and have a chat with some of their coaches and really understand a little more about that high rate. It's very different to what we focus on here.
Yeah.
And it goes against the grain a little bit. I'm quite aesthetic in my approach. I like rowing to look nice and to rhythmical and flow, and it's about bodies and posture and shape. It's flying up and down the slide has never been particularly attractive to me, but it certainly wins races, so I can't knock it in that sense. So.
I'm guessing. So you must have met Antonio Colomanici at some point.
Oh, I don't think I have, to be honest.
Okay.
No, I have not.
I'll introduce you guys, and you can
introduce me. Yeah, I'd love to get over there this weekend. Yeah,
I know that this might be more painful because your sister was coaching, I think, the women's double actually for Australia, and they narrowly missed out on a final place.
Yeah, another 0.1 second finish.
Yeah, it was them and maybe Norway, I think. But
Norway, yeah.
The Australian team, didn't have a great Olympics. Very disappointing medal tally, I think, for them and what they hoped for. From the outside, is there any way you can look at that and understand what went on?
Very difficult for me. I'm not in there.
Yeah.
I wouldn't really know. But yeah, you're dead right. I mean, it was obviously by Australia's standards a very poor Olympics for them. So they'll do some soul searching, no doubt, and Paul Thompson will whip them into line. And hopefully, not hopefully, the next 4 years I'm sure will be better. I mean, James is a very competent coach. He's going across there now. Mm-hmm. So I'm sure they'll do a lot better this next block.
So are you looking for a new coach then to come into the system, or have you got somebody there that's just going to slide into that role?
Initially, we are just going to cope with what we've got on staff at the centre, and then we'll see how things go towards the end of the year, and then we maybe have opening it up and advertising, but we'll just keep it within house at the moment. So.
What do you think of the way the Dutch do things? Like they had Franco, I know they kind of share around a bit, but like Franco Fossi was coaching the men's single, the men's double, the men's quad, just one coach. That seems interesting, the way they make that work.
Oh, look, I'm very interested in that whole area. The Roms do the same. There's two coaches for the whole women's team almost. It's very much the modern way I see. And economically, it's certainly going to be much easier to survive the cuts that we're getting in sport now if you cut your coaching base. Even though I'm cutting my own throat there, aren't I? But I think the British model of one coach, one crew, and it was the Australian model too. Yeah. Those years are probably gone. We've probably moved on a little bit. We've got to be a little more efficient, and I have absolutely no problems coaching 2 or even 3 crews from one coach. I think you certainly got to be on the ball, and you've got to have the people behind you supporting that, because the athletes are not used to it in Australia or in England. They're not used to one not having their coach, if you know what I mean. And yeah. you do get a lot of pushback. There's no question about that. So it'd have to be an acceptance thing across the board that's the way we're going. And, so, but look, I totally hear what you're saying. And I think it's, economically very sound. And I don't think you need to suffer, especially if you put light crews together. Like the women's quad and the women's 4, they're 4-5 seconds apart. In my mind, they should be training together, and even across sexes. The men's scull, the women's double, almost identical prognostic speeds, should train together. So I think we have to be a bit smarter than that moving to the future, just because of financial constraints on programs. So.
Yeah, talking about that, I mean, one of the things that I've had conversations with people about is the sustainability. I mean, initially you look at the women's 8 and say the entries at World Cups and even to an extent World Championships. And latterly, that could even be the case for the men's 8 as to how sustainable that is. And I know, for example, the Romanians, that they did choose to double up in Paris, and I think they were the only country that did double up into the women's 8. But what's your take on that in terms of entries for World Cups in the women's 8, and how sustainable the World Rowing's current program is?
Look, I think on the women's side, I've only been coaching women these last 3 or 4 years. The rest of my career has always been with the men. But I know when they introduced the women's 4 that I thought there would be a drain on the 8, because to equalise the numbers at regattas, and it needed to happen. I think we're almost over that drain now, but you're dead right. The numbers in the women's 8 are always going to be problematic. So unless we double up and try different things like that, it is going to be an issue. So I've got no issues with doubling up and trying to get it more competitive in the fields. And it may well be that that's the way the Olympic movement goes, down the track. Just to economise a little bit, we might be all forced to double up and get multiple medal winners. I've seen it quite a few documents now and heard it discussed that they're thinking along those lines, that they want multiple medal winners, so people doubling up are going to be a commonplace maybe perhaps in the future.
And there's even talk, and it might come before this extraordinary Congress in March, of a mixed day in LA. Whether that'll happen or not, I don't know. I wonder if that's something you've heard or what your views on that might be.
Certainly have, and it certainly doesn't seem to be any issues with it in the Paris side of things, does it? The mixed 4 and the doubles, they go very well, and to me, it's a logical way to go. If we're going to have to cut our numbers for whatever reason they say we need to, I think we're just a big sport by Olympic terms anyway for the numbers that we have. So they're ways of making it a little more attractive, to keep us in the Olympics, so to speak. So I think all those things are open to debate at the moment, and I certainly wouldn't be cutting them off. I think they can be.
Yeah. I just wonder, is it possible do you have any indication of the retention rate from the sort of Paris Olympiad squads that might be throwing their hat in the ring to go forward to LA either next year or in future years in the Olympiad?
Within the British team, I've got a fairly good idea. I've spoken to all the girls pretty much across the board, and there's just 1 or 2 who've said they are retiring at this stage, and that they were people that I quite would expect to be thinking along those ways. The rest of them are very much either planning on coming back or on the fence a little bit. And I think you will know in the next few weeks and months how successful we've been at retaining our athletes. For me, it's a strong benchmark of a successful program. If you can retain your athletes and keep them coming to 2 or 3 cycles, I think that's certainly the most efficient way of doing it. So I would hope that we'll have a really good retention rate coming off the back of this Olympics. We've had good success. The squad is young. The girls have got, most of them have another Olympics in them. So I'd be very disappointed if we can't keep most of them going on through the next cycle.
Yeah, I know that you've got a family birthday that you need to organise and get into. So let you go just very shortly. This is quite a difficult question, and you might not have an answer. But I'm just thinking of great crews or great rowing boats that you've seen in your involvement with the sport, and if you could say, okay, this is perhaps one of the greatest crews that I've seen in my involvement of the sport, who would you point to?
Peter, Anthony, and Steve Hawkins.
Oh, wow.
Heavyweight men's double. 2 lightweights. Almost perfect technique.
Yeah.
So I'll pull them out, definitely.
I'd love that. That's great. And you came out with that answer just like that. Yeah, it's been fantastic talking with you, and Andy. Really, really interesting. The stuff on physiology, your own personal development, and just what a difference you've made when you've come into the British system. That's been fantastic. So we'll end the live part of this interview now. Andy Randell, you've been an absolute star. Thank you.
Thanks, Martin. Catch you soon. Cheers.